All right, we are back. Episode 3 of Craft Politics. I'm Joseph Lavoine. I'm joined by
Andrew Percy, without a resting bitch face.
without a resting bitch face. And look, you got some art on the walls.
I do. Look, and this. You might recognise this. It's a place called Big Ben. It's in London. Which is in England, and that was actually drawn by a colleague of mine. She sketched that for me. Holly Murphy-Croft, my former neighbour in Scunthorpe, she, as a thank you for me being basically a mentor to her, that's how I remember it, that's my truth, she drew me that, which is really nice. So she did a great job, right? That's amazing.
Yeah, very nice. Okay,
so I put
good.
it on the wall so it looks like I have like something in my life.
Like you're a normal person. No, that's good. That's nice. Yeah. We are drinking this week a
Well, we're back in Vancouver, we should say that really as well.
Well, yeah, so we're both back in Vancouver, although we are recording this remotely because I am on vacation this week. I actually went snowshoeing yesterday on Cypress Mountain, and it was lovely. It's actually perfect time of year to go do some snowshoeing.
That's Joseph's humble brag of what an outdoorsy person he is. And, do you know what I did? I walked to the Shoppers Drug Mart and bought some milk. But,
yes.
By the way, thank you for letting me use your super elite status to board the aircraft with you before moving back, which was great. And we even went into the lounge as well. And I don't know whether you've ever flown the super elite that Joseph is. There's a special place you go, which is the lounge, but it's like just the super elite people, right? And there's like baths of milk, and it's just incredible, right? And there's like people feed you grapes, you get your foot massage. It was genuinely, I see how the other half live now. So thank you for allowing me to share that for a moment.
No, it's one of the perks of being my co-host on the show.
They even had takeout food, which I stuffed my bag full of, which the other super elite people were looking at me with utter disdain. I think that was my tell. They knew that I wasn't used to that, right? So
yeah. Oh, who's this noob? Of course, you probably were stuffing all that food into your suitcase because we were late getting into the lounge because I think we lost a good 20 minutes. You trying to get your coat out of your checked bag. So for our listeners, Andrew and I do not travel well together because I insist on carry-on only. And Andrew packs as if he's off to another planet for the next 6 months of his life. And so we had to check in the bag. And I didn't realize that you had packed a second jacket that you had to take out of the...
Yeah, that was just for the flight. There's a jacket for the flight. And then there was a jacket for Toronto because it was very cold. I mean, you were freezing cold because it was minus 15, and you literally looked freezing the whole time. I had a massive jacket, so that was my travel jacket. There we are.
Yeah,
that was me putting my travel jacket on, whilst also then trying to use my strong thighs to put my case together.
So anyone who's listening to the show, you'll have to actually watch this on YouTube or on Spotify, but I do have a photo I took of Andrew because I was thoroughly embarrassed that this is what I had to witness in the middle of Pearson.
No, I'm not an animal. I mean, who doesn't travel with at least one or more extra jackets? I mean, say I'm not an animal, Joseph. So, it's a travel trunk. I travel like I'm boarding the Titanic, except obviously with a hope that the actual journey ends. I mean, properly, at the destination. So. But anyway, we're back.
The real fun, though, is I'm going to Yakima tomorrow for a day. I'm going to go explore some new breweries, and I'm trying to get it in before the tariffs come in because I haven't quite made a decision on this. I don't know how you feel, but I'm partially inclined to just not vacation in the U.S. if the tariffs come in. They haven't come in yet, so I feel like I can squeak in a little trip. I'm going for a day. I'm going to try out a bunch of new breweries where most of the world's best hops are grown, so I'm really excited by this.
Although if we do become the 52nd state, those would now be domestic beers, so that would be...
Yeah,
it would be an upside, right? We'd have
be an upside.
Access to delicious domestic beer.
I'm a little scared for this drive, though. I was Googling it last night, preparing for it. I was like, I have to actually climb up a whole bunch of mountains on this drive. And Washington State Transportation Authority has a law that you have to have tire chains in your trunk with you in case a snowstorm comes in. So
what this is all building up to, listeners, is that Joseph will come back with some story of how he had to ski down the mountainside, wrestle a bear, do all these incredible things, and still got to taste delicious beer and lose a load of calories in the process. So
there we go. Earn those beers.
All
right, let's crack open this. Fat Tug IPA. So Fat Tug IPA is one of the classic British Columbian beers. It is dangerous, though. It is a 7% IPA. Sorry, I'm not going to drink the whole thing because I am planning to go for a run right after this, which
Of
I
course
feel
you
like I'm
are.
doing.
Yes, of course you are. Me too, actually. I was probably going to just do a quick run around Stanley Park, and then I was going to scramble up a mountain, and then probably do some night skiing, and maybe some snowshoeing as well. So, but no, I mean it's difficult to be us, Joseph. I get it, right? So,
Yeah.
these humble brags, like this is what these are. This is just humble brags. But also,
So
this beer,
I'll be delicately sipping this thing.
this
Sorry,
beer
this beer.
stops your legs working, right? It's a delicious beer, and my beer club guys in the UK know this very well because whenever we have Fat Tug, everything just goes wrong afterwards because it's just such a delicious beer, and
It is so
for some reason
dangerous.
you get fat tugged by it.
You do. This is a tall can, but I noticed recently they started selling 250 ml versions of it, and that to me is the best way to have a Fat Tug because you can. Yeah, to your point, they're so dangerous. I don't know why. I don't know.
There's so much wrong in
Something
that
about the
statement,
hop
but anyway, sorry. There's so much wrong in that previous statement, but we'll not delve into that. But anyway,
Okay, well, should we get into the issue scan then?
yes, let's.
So 3 stories for us to talk about this week. Number 1, Deep Six's U.S. stocks. That one's a bit of a mouthful, but if you haven't heard already, I'm having a hard time saying it. I'm only one sip into the Fat Tug.
You're probably just exhausted from all your exercise. That must be it. But anyway, please do try.
DeepSeek's AI assistant has overtaken ChatGPT to become the top-rated free application on Apple's App Store in the US, the UK, and unsurprisingly, China. The surge in its popularity has led to a significant sell-off in U.S. tech stocks, particularly affecting companies like NVIDIA and other AI-related firms. And we're talking about NVIDIA on Monday lost $600 billion of market value as a result of this new AI. So big news. Of course, there are some political implications to that. We'll come back to that in a second. So that's story number 1. Story number 2. Donald Trump ridicules Denmark and insists U.S. will take Greenland. He's ridiculed Denmark's attempts to defend Greenland with additional patrols, including 2 extra dog sleds, as he insisted America would take control of the strategically crucial Arctic island. And story number 3. Canada and Mexico still waiting to get hit with tariffs. So when we last recorded, we recorded on a couple hours after the inauguration, and we were like, whew, no tariff announcements in the actual inauguration speech itself, but we were like, hold caution, it might still be coming. And literally within a couple hours of us hitting the record button on that, Trump was like, oh, by February 1st, tariffs might be coming on Canada. So we are all holding our collective breath right now, trying to see when that lands. And it has triggered the threat of these tariffs has triggered at least one province in Canada, the single largest province, Ontario, to go to an election effective on Wednesday when the show comes out. So we'll come back to that story, but of course it does have implications for the Liberal leadership race occurring in Canada. So let's start with our first story, DeepSeek, which I'm really struggling to say. This to me is a really interesting story because it speaks to I think it's got so many geopolitical undertones about it, right? So we've got this Chinese company that is supposed to not have access to the latest chip technology because of export controls, able to, despite that, innovate. And for notionally, it hasn't been confirmed yet, they're saying for a fraction of the cost that has taken, like for example, OpenAI to build their ChatGPT model, they've been able to build something that's just as good. Now, I think personally that is just a function of, this is what we often see from Chinese technology companies, which is their ability to commodify the innovations that precede that work. But Trump came out on Monday and says this is a massive wake-up call for U.S. industries. Let me read his quote. He says the release of DeepSeek AI from a Chinese company should be a wake-up call for our industries that we need to be laser-focused on competing to win. What do you make of this?
I suppose the first question is, do we believe the claims from China that this has been done at half the cost? I mean, this is the first thing, right? I mean, this is not an area I'm an expert in, but that's the first thing that jumped out to me was, well, do we believe it?
Yeah, there's some skepticism as to whether they actually pull it off for the amount that they say. What I do believe to be true is that even if that amount is not quite exact, if they're sort of fudging around the corners with it, that my guess is they probably did develop this for a fraction of the cost. And the reason why I'm confident in that is that is the playbook that often Chinese tech companies use, right? It's to you let the Americans spend a lot of money developing the original tech, and then you take it, copy paste and riff off of it. Now, I'm not saying that it's as simple as that. Developing large language models is much more complicated, but I do think Trump is right that it is a wake-up call, because we have so much of what I think from a digital tech play was going to be like America's next great big chapter and the next golden age for America, to use his language. I think some of that was banked on America's ability to innovate in the AI space. And if a Chinese company can come in and in a matter of months rebuild what took the better part of years for OpenAI and Google and Meta to build, then I think that's a huge concern. And are we getting to a place where we're going to commodify AI? So
this is a whole challenge for the West now, right? We spent the whole of the 20th century of Western technological developments and dominance, which we were able to monetize to build the wealthiest societies ever known in the history of human existence on this planet. And here we are in 2025, where whatever it is, whatever the technologies, wherever they're developed in the West, be it AI, you think about electric vehicles and all the rest of it, we're not able to get the benefits out of those that we would have done back in the 20th century, right? Because we've now got these huge challenges from China, India, wherever. You may not be also abiding by the same rules of the game we are, don't have the added costs of what they have to pay their workers, all the rest of it, right? So I don't know how the West responds to this, right? Trump is right on this, right, in saying that this is a massive wake-up call, but how do you compete with China in this space when you have such high underlying costs in the US as we're paying, in terms of salaries, infrastructure costs, all the rest of it? So, how do you compete with that?
Yeah, well, particularly when it's just the ability as well for China to innovate despite the constraints. So
yes,
the interesting thing here too is that they had acquired, to me, this is an example of regulatory foresight. So I've been working on this framework for the last 5 or 6 months around the 8 regulatory powers that the most successful organizations deploy to become successful. And one of them is the power of regulatory foresight. And the fact that DeepSeek acquired a stockpile of NVIDIA A100 chips before the U.S. export restrictions tightened, to me was just such a great example of regulatory foresight. They identified the threat coming, they took the appropriate action, and now they benefited from it. If they can innovate with cheaper, less effective chips, then once they do get their hands on more effective ones, then you start to wonder, can they leapfrog? So to me, it's an example of regulatory foresight. All right, Donald Trump going after Denmark and Greenland.
We get into this a bit with our interview later with Nicki. I guess we don't need to spend too long on this, other than to say that there's this phone call between the Danish Prime Minister, which, as you see, we talk about this with our guests this week, which is described as horrendous. There's two things on this, right? First of all, as people will see from the interview, actually, all fair fucks to Trump for actually calling out a lot of the West for the threats that we're facing and not investing in doing anything about it, right? Secondly, everyone goes, "Oh, this is ridiculous," and all the rest of it. It's not outside the realms of possible. We seem to be in the space where we think borders don't change, right? Particularly in the West, right? We think borders are set and all the rest of it. That's actually not the history of the planet, right? Is that actually whether it's the Louisiana, particularly not the United States, whether it's the Louisiana Purchase, Alaska, even the border between Canada and America, land swaps, land changes over time, and so it's not actually. It sounds a bit mad, but at the same time, it's not outside the realms of possibility that, countries do acquire new territory, because that's the history of the planet. We just in the West have become fashioned in this view that, these are the borders and this is how they will remain forevermore. Actually, no, we've had a whole series of new independent countries created in Europe over the last 20, 30 years. So, and at the end of the day, it's down to Greenlanders, right? There's only 57,000 Greenlanders. So,
yeah, it's not.
You think about the example of Newfoundland, right? Newfoundlanders had to vote, and one of the options that I think they were able to choose from was it 48, was Dominion status under the UK, join Canada, and wasn't there even an option, or whether it was on the ballot or talked about, of actually joining the United States as well?
Gosh, you know your history on this better than I do. I should know this, but I don't.
I think that was one of the options, whether it was put to the public joining the United States, but certainly there was an active movement to have the US considered an option. So,
Right.
at the end of the day, it's Greenlanders do have a right of self-determination. The Danish government keeps saying, but that seemed to be in the favour of the independence people were thinking. But who knows where this will end? But however, the serious issue here, apart from the whole probably shouldn't go and take it by force, right, is actually there's huge interference in the Arctic. Someone needs to do something about it. And for all of his faults, Trump has got people talking about it and has got the Danish government committing to spend billions in the process.
Yeah, well, I made this point last week on the tariff issue for Canada. My deep frustration that it's taken us a Trump threat of tariffs for us to finally figure out how to break down interprovincial trade barriers, something that we should have been doing like decades ago.
Good.
Well, it's like Europe is finally waking up to the fact that we do have global threats. Arctic security should not be taken for granted. That does require like a collective effort and investment in defense spending, and it's been an easy ride for way too long, and I just think it's interesting that it's just taken Trump, within a week of being in office to start to really shake the tree on these things. So maybe many of us don't like his style, the way he's doing it, but holy shit, I don't know.
Yeah,
it's causing people to look up.
Yeah, exactly. I look up on things that we should have been looking up at, and that everybody else has just been ignoring or putting in the too hot to handle or too difficult to handle basket. So.
All right, well, let's finish with our tariff story. So, yeah, we are still holding our breath. We're recording this on Tuesday, January 28th. We are several days away, but less than a week away from potentially being on the receiving end of across-the-board 25% tariffs. Now, there's difference of views, at least in Canada, as to whether Trump will actually go forward with it on February 1st. There's still a hope that, he's actually asked, his officials to look into options. But it's the unpredictability of Trump, really, that for me we can't take anything for granted. And that's why we now have Ontario, which has a lot at stake in the tariffs fight, heading into an election. On Wednesday, the incumbent premier there, Doug Ford, has said he needs a mandate to deal with this. And so a lot of movement. I mean, I think right now in Canada, we really can't think about anything else right now, can we?
No, not at all. Look, as you say, it's this 25% tariffs means permanent recession, right? This is a country that's 80% reliant for exports to the United States, right? So this is... Now, it's funny, when we were down in DC in December at the IDU, I saw a couple of congressmen I know, and we had Stephen Harper speaking, and they were all, no, this 25%, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. This is just bluster. It's a negotiating tactic. This is what Trump does. He does deals. He wants, action from Canada, as we've seen on the border, on fentanyl, on a whole range of other issues. There's a deal to be done, but I don't know. I mean, keeps hinting at it. He keeps, not even hinting. So this is really quite dangerous. I mean, the political beneficiary of this so far, which is interesting, is it looks like it's Doug Ford in Ontario, right? His poll numbers, as he's like, the Canada's not for sale hat, which is with the same font as MAGA hats. So it looks like his Tory government there will be returned comfortably. So the next question is, thinking, first of all, look, it's impossible for business to plan around any of this, right? What do you do if you're in business? This is just ridiculous. But what's the impact on politics in Canada? Well, in Ontario, it looks to be helping the incumbent. The question is, does it help the incumbent federally as well then?
Well, I think that is the question. I was wondering whether does it potentially change the ballot question in Canada? Of course, that's going to be dependent on when the federal election takes place. I think Doug Ford is right to seek a mandate because this is so consequential. It matters so much to future economic well-being of that province, and notionally, you want your premier to have negotiating power, and let's line up the election cycle.
To go though, hasn't he? Still 18 months, right? Is it roughly 18 months on the mandate on his current term?
Yeah, I agree. So yes, he still has some time, but Trump's in office for 4 years. You want to line up your own cycle to go okay, clean slate. We've got 4 years of sorting this out. No distractions midway.
I say I'm just nervous of early elections because we did one in 2017, which I thought was a good idea. We went into that 20 points ahead, and then it was very clear after a week or two when you were knocking on doors, people were like, you got another 2 years left. Why are you coming to us? So I get nervous of how the public can turn on these things. But, that's a strong argument. And so far, because in the absence of Justin Trudeau's leadership, which I would really rather term followership rather than leadership, Doug Ford is a guy who's kind of put himself front and center, right? So it's working for him. But does it change federally? Like, does Mark Carney, who we assume will be the Liberal leader, does he come in and say, I'm the guy, 2 central bank governorships under my thing, I understand this stuff, I'm new, the pressure cooker has been released, Trudeau's gone, we need somebody. I think the polling seems fairly strong for the Conservatives and where Canadians are on a whole range of issues, that they seem to be done with the Liberals. But it is not impossible, though. People do retreat to hang on to nurse for fear of worse. So incumbents tend to do well out of difficult situations. So we saw it in COVID, right? So will we see that?
I have to imagine if tariffs become the ballot, some version of tariffs becomes a ballot question in a federal campaign, that is ultimately it's an economic issue. And I think at the moment for now, the Conservatives and Pierre Poilievre are like so strong. They're so far in advance of any Liberal incarnation on this that I think it still benefits them. Can we see a softening? I think that is possible. We're starting to see actually a little bit of softening for Conservative numbers in recent polls. Now, I'm taking those with a grain of salt. I'm going to wait until we have
how they were doing. They were online polls, right?
Yeah, online polls and
automated ones as well. So.
Exactly. I want to see like 3 or 4 polls from different pollsters.
Yeah, Nanus or Angus Reid.
Yeah, exactly.
Leaders, yeah.
Before we read too much into it, but
you can build a narrative around it, right? You can build a case for why, with a change leadership, stability, and also if they can successfully tie the Tories as kind of Trump light, or how can you expect the people who are mimicking him in some respects, which I don't think they are, right? I think there's a world of difference between the Canadian Conservatives and where Trump is, but that will be the Liberal playbook, right? I mean, it's always a Liberal playbook. But yeah, I mean, I think it's see where this lands, right? If the ballot question is tariffs, you can argue it in both directions, right, as to who benefits. You can build a narrative as to why the Liberals could benefit, but equally you can say, there's a strong argument you can build for why the Conservatives would. So I don't know where this ends.
Yeah, it's a bit tough to assess at this point.
So.
Other than I think the faster you can go into a federal election, then the higher the likelihood that benefits the Conservatives at this point in time.
You know what, Joseph? The more I drink Fat Tug, the less I care. Suddenly the tariffs don't seem a problem, right?
It's just a miracle we're still stringing some thoughts together here.
Yeah, it's fine. In fact, actually, let's invade America. A couple more of these. My legs won't work, but I'm going to feel up to it, right? Yeah. I mean, this is the Fat Tug invasion, right? This is what it... Again, that sounds wrong. But, so...
All right. Well, that brings that's our issues wrap. We're going to this week. We're really excited. We've got a friend of yours on the show. So why don't you tell us why we have Nicki coming on, and we'll cut to the interview.
Yeah. So I do actually have friends. Thank you, Joseph, for confirming that, because I think Rita and Nada were unsure whether I had anything in my life, given how blank my walls were. Rita and Nada are our wonderful producers. But yeah, Nicki Neilly is a good pal of mine. Met her on campaigns. I get into this in the interview. You'll hear we just recorded it just before we recorded this portion. But she's down in DC, been around in wonk world, in think tank world, and very firmly on the Republican wing of politics. But yeah, just really insightful takes on where things are at, right? Of which I think it's fair to say we can all conclude nobody really knows where Trump 2.0 is going to end. But gosh, we've got certainly lots to talk about. So, and you'll see from our interview with Nicki.
And as you also hear from the interview, it still took Percy a little while to sort out his microphone. Yeah. So he's on the old system. So apologies if the sound's not so great. But we are now sorted out.
Look, I'm now 32. It's hard to... Sorry? Okay, all right. Maybe I'm 35, right? You forced it out of me. The truth has been forced out of me. And, when you get to 35, as you'll remember from a decade ago, things get more difficult, right? Technology becomes more difficult. So... when I'm as old as you, I can't imagine what it'll be like. So
you have to come join me scaling the side of the mountains. Okay, let's cut to the to the interview, and then we'll regroup and make sense of it all as we finish our Fat Tug.
Good.
Well, I'm really happy to be joined by my good friend Nicki Neilly today. Nicki and I have known each other for quite some time. It was actually back in 2005 in a general election in the UK. I think we first met, wasn't it, Nicki?
It was, yeah.
So Nicki was involved in foreign interference. We didn't call it that back then, but technically now it would be foreign interference. And you also came and interfered in subsequent elections in the UK as well, right?
I did. I put things in people's mailboxes on your behalf, so
you did. Thank you for that. And the last time was, of course, in 2019, where Nicki came over and helped in the 2019 general election on the mean streets of Scunthorpe. But it's not technically foreign interference, though, because you have an Irish passport, right? So Irish citizens can vote in the UK, so we'll let you off. But
well, also, and then I got to tell people you were such a good candidate that I was compelled to come over from America.
Yeah, this is true. Because there was literally nobody in the UK who was prepared to help. So we had to draft people in from overseas. But actually, when we first met in the 2005 election, do you remember we most bonded over that very screechy helper who was calling people up on election day, screaming down the phone at them, "We know that you know that it's election day." Anyway, but Nicki is much more famous for things other than helping some of my election campaigns and some of my neighbours. So really great to have you here today. Nicki is your president and CEO of Parents Defending Education. And you've been very active in think tank world for some time now. You're a senior fellow, previously worked for the Independent Women's Network, at the Cato Institute, and more importantly, also a Republican, this will shock people on our podcast that we've got somebody from the right of politics on. But look, we're really pleased to have you in today because we wanted to talk to. She's also got a really great personality and is just also very funny.
Thank God.
Finally, yes. We were struggling with just Joseph and myself, but also she's a good friend. So I really do appreciate and thank you for coming on today. We really want to pick your brains, not least because your involvement in Republican politics. You've actually even given evidence to Senate committees, but also because of your work in think tanks or what we would call wonk world. So thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
That's great. Well, we'll probably just jump into it then. So we're a week into this new Trump administration. So I just wondered if maybe two starters for 10, as it were, anything that shocked you and anything that surprised you. And when I say shocked you, as in like something happened that you didn't expect to happen, and has Trump failed to do something you did expect to see happen? So I don't know whether those are good starters.
Yeah, I mean, there has been just such a fire hose of activity. Honestly, it's like hard to keep up. On Sunday, I was flying back from Florida, and I landed. I was just like watching a movie on the plane like an idiot. And I landed. I was like, oh my gosh, we just picked a war with Colombia. Cool, what's going on? And then apparently, like, by the time I was texting friends, like, what the hell is happening? It had like been resolved to the point that the Colombian president was like, also, you can use our presidential plane. And so, that was kind of unexpected. I didn't have that on my bingo card. And it's funny because thinking back over the past 4 years, Trump being off of social media, I think a lot of people kind of forgot how chaotic things were. And so I have like a non-trivial amount of PTSD at this point. But it's funny because it's coming at such a breakneck pace across all sectors that the Babylon Bee had an article a couple days ago. It said, exhausted media asks Trump to, begs Trump to please, slow down or take a day off. And I kind of feel like that too. It's like, I can't even process what happened yesterday, much less deal with the stuff that's coming out today. So
it really is insane.
Yeah.
I've taken this week off. I'm supposed to be on vacation, but obviously the podcast comes first. But I logged onto we have just our team space yesterday to look. Andrew put in some notes for our script for today, and I honestly eight of the 9 bullets, I had no idea what he was talking about because all 8 of those 9 bullets occurred yesterday when the 12 hours I decided I wasn't gonna look at my phone because I was snowshoeing in the mountains. It's it is absolutely insane. Do you think this is going to be sustainable for, I wonder if sometimes it's just first 100 days in office, you just really want to make a mark and you go, 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 go? Or do you think this is potentially a sign of the times, for the next 4 years?
I think it is probably a sign of the times. I mean, there was a joke kind of during the last Trump administration that it was infrastructure week every week because they would, his comms team would have the best laid plans, and then he would pop off on Twitter in the middle of the night and people would be like, all right, I guess we're talking about something else. And so we never actually got to infrastructure week. And I think that is happening as well. It's also, we're in a very dynamic geopolitical moment in time too. And so this admin, they might have some best laid plans. It does seem like the White House is more well coordinated this time than last time. But I mean, who knows, how Xi Jinping or Putin are going to react to some of the stuff that's been going on. The Middle East obviously continues to be an absolute tinderbox. And so who knows? But I don't think they're slowing down. I mean, I really think, frankly, the Republicans have had the past 4 years to kind of plan and strategize. And so I think there is a significant effort to make this a whole of government effort.
So we can get into some of the things that having a breakneck speed probably, but just before we do, is there anything that you thought you would have seen in this first week that we haven't actually seen from him?
I mean, I thought that we would already be in control of Greenland, quite honestly. I'm a little bit disappointed.
I did see a funny thing on Instagram the other day, which is like, how can Americans expect to take over Greenland when they had to move the inauguration inside because it was cold? But I just wonder if there's any policy area, anything that you thought you might have seen in the first week, but there's been so much happening, right? So I suppose it's hard to pick something that hasn't happened because so much has.
Yeah, I mean, there's taxes, there's tariffs, there's foreign policy, there's DEI, there's like everything. And to read the Wall Street Journal and other outlets right now, corporations are putting in place war rooms. I am on the university board of a public university in Virginia, and I emailed them and said, what is your plan to comply with these executive orders? I mean, everyone is scrambling. No one actually even really knows how this is going to impact them. Institutions are largely risk averse, and this is someone who came into office with a mandate to disrupt. And so I think there's going to be a lot of follow-up. There's going to have to be cleanup on some of his executive orders. And there's also obviously going to be a lot of litigation as people kind of realize that, like, whoa, like these unilateral actions about firing inspectors general. I mean, people are reading up over, what are these like laws from 1974 in the middle of the night, like, that he is citing. So I think there's just, there is a lot going on.
Yeah, I think I read something the other day, which was yesterday. As I say, things happen so quickly. But it was in relation to the DEI stuff. It was, I think the U.S. military had taken down a video on the history of African-American soldiers because they were concerned it wouldn't comply with the new DEI provisions. And I guess this is the thing. If you're in business or if you're running any institution in the US, the ordinary way this works is you get a proposal, you wait for legislation, you watch it grind its way through the parliamentary legislative procedures, you know where you can apply pressure, you know where you're going to do your advocacy. But on these executive orders, there's such a liberal use of them, it's just impossible to plan, right? Because at the stroke of a pen, your entire world could have changed. And for somebody who makes so much of being in business and with a business background, you would think that perhaps he would understand that these are causing considerable costs and stress to the very people he wants to go out there and make America great again.
Yeah, I think, to be fair, though, President Obama was the one who said, look, I have a pen and a phone. When he couldn't get what he wanted through Congress, he just ended up using executive orders. And so he was kind of one of the early ones to weaponize this process. And as we saw under Biden as well, same thing. The absolute amount of lawless nonsense that came out of the Biden administration between the administration and even the morning of the inauguration when he pardoned his family.
Preemptive pardons.
Frankly, I don't think anybody has a leg to stand on to criticize Trump. I think that all the January 6ers should have been pardoned. I think that was, in my mind, that was treason. I don't like that. But it really weakens other people's hand to say, well, you're attacking, the institution of democracy when that has just happened for the past, 12 years.
Yeah, when you pardon your own son, right? And then you pardon, you don't exactly have the moral high ground.
Yeah.
So, no, it's interesting. So can you give us, you're down in the States, we're up here in what might be the state, we're not sure. Although Joseph and I do have a proposal to make the United States Canada's province. So we'll get onto that maybe a bit later. But how do you think Americans are generally responding to this first week? Because there was a poll by CBS which said I think a quarter of Kamala Harris voters were actually feeling positive about the future. So, is what he's doing not just satisfying the Republican base, but actually is a lot of it finding favor with a big section of Democrats, people who didn't actually vote for him?
Yeah, let's remember, Trump picked up a significant portion of minority voters, and even looking, when you dig into issue-by-issue polling, immigration was a real deal-breaker for Democrats. People generally do not like open borders and criminals coming in, and that is what has happened for the past 4 years. On gender issues, even Democrats feel that a lot of the gender issues in schools have gone way too far. That was like an 80-20 issue, and so
Really?
For people to say, even looking at a Democratic representative from Massachusetts, Seth Moulton, who after the election said, I'm the father of 2 daughters. I don't want a boy on my daughter's sports teams. I think it's funny, the Journal had an article recently calling this America's Glasnost, where there's people sort of feel liberated to say the things that they have been thinking in their hearts for a long time, be it about, I'm not like the COVID stuff went a little bit far, or things like that. I think it's people, there is kind of on some level a sense of relief that people don't have to hold their breath and hold their tongue anymore. I do not expect that to continue. I think people are going to tire of his antics very quickly, but at this moment in time, I think some of the stuff that they have taken action on is actually a good thing. Even on the anti-DEI front, to get back to a colorblind society, that is what Martin Luther King had promised, and what the Democrats have pushed in America over the past couple of years is absolutely the opposite of that.
Yeah, it was interesting. I think that actually your point about how he has enabled people to say things that they were feeling. I don't think that's just across in the United States. I think that's actually across much of the Western world. Actually, that you're suddenly seeing people saying things that they probably we whispered them in groups of friends who you can trust, and say, well, actually, I think this has gone a bit too far. But people say, oh, you must never say that publicly because it'll be bad for your career. You'll get cancelled, you'll get doxxed, all the rest of it. Suddenly people are starting to say some of these things. And it's funny, there was a poll out, a big piece of research done in the UK in the just released in last week, which, about young people and their thoughts. And actually, it showed this real divide, actually, with a big chunk of young men, particularly, who feel that this whole issue around race and around DEI has gone too far, and that they are now being disadvantaged. So whilst they were committed to equality, they also feel as if now it's gone too far. And I think that people have been thinking these things. It's not like Trump made people think these things, right? It's that they've been thinking them, but they haven't felt the confidence to say it. For all of his, look, there are good and bad things that I think he's done so far, but actually he's giving people that agency now to actually say what they feel on a whole range of subjects.
Let's look at, Ibram Kendi said the solution to past discrimination is present discrimination. And so, you have seen, right, in different settings where, yes, we are actively, not admitting white boys to programs or things like that. I think that's kind of morally as well as constitutionally wrong. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have to be that way. We don't have to, hold people back. I was at an event recently, and somebody looked at the percentage of kids that are admitted to college, and right now it's like 60-40 females to men, who are going to college at this point. That's actually a wider gap than when Title IX was written in 1972. Wow. So I asked the presenter, I said, so does that mean we should strike down Title IX? And he kind of went pale. But, if you have laws to lead to equality, and then it not only gets to equality, but then kind of goes past the tipping point, at what point do we say, all right, mission accomplished? I know we in America have a bad, history with saying things like that prematurely.
Right.
But at what point do we start to say, all right, enough is enough. We're not going to meddle in this anymore.
No, I think that absolutely. And so it has been all done at breakneck speed, though, and the risk with that potentially is that it doesn't have longevity, right? If these things aren't thought through, you can very quickly get a very strong counter-reaction to some of this stuff, and that's what I guess, will have to be guarded against.
Well, even I wonder how much of that can happen within this term. You look at how Trump has, in the space of a couple of years, gone from position A on TikTok to position B on TikTok, a full 180. Circumstances change. I like this question, Andrew, around how rigid is what we're seeing these first couple of days. Is it it's a second mandate, a much larger mandate, much more convincing win? So no, this, he's got this agenda. He's sticking to it, come hell or high water. Or are we going to just see a bit of a transactional president who is looking for the next win, the next deal? And that means, whatever he says today, if circumstances change in 180 days, he can undo them. I think about tariffs, right? He struck a deal with Colombia, things can move. Can we in Canada, can we strike the right deal with him where, he said February 21, 25% tariffs across the board, but that was a week ago, and a lot can change in a week.
And just to add to that before perhaps answer, Nicki, is actually that this flipping 180, which people see as an inconsistency, and because it is, but people see as a kind of evidence of there is no underlying political kind of ideology or whatever to any of this. Actually, there was a really interesting piece by Justin Webb in the Times of London, which said that this is absolutely, and I wrote the quote down because I thought this was quite interesting, and Justin Webb's take on this was, it's keep 'em guessing elevated to high political style. In fact, more than that, it is actually substance. It is what Trumpism is. So, we all look at it, people can be tempted to look at this kind of, well, he might think this now, but in 180 days might think that. But this is actually the essence of the political side. It is actually substance. It's just not what we're used to in politics, where traditionally somebody has a principle and a view, and like they, almost die in a ditch of it, even when it might be politically damaging to them. So I don't know. Maybe this is the substance of it, right?
I mean, I think, he has delivered on a lot of the things that he was saying on the campaign trail, right? I mean, even down to freeing Ross Ulbricht, that Silk Road founder, which I personally think was a horrible idea, but my libertarian husband thinks is terrific. That was something that he promised when he spoke at the Libertarian Party convention. But it's funny because I think where people's brains are being scrambled right now is a lot of his policy priorities, initiatives don't line neatly up into the U.S. two-party system, right? I mean, Republicans always traditionally being, limited government, low intervention, pro-business, low taxes, et cetera, global engagement. And that has really scrambled people across the board. And I think that's, he has kind of remade the Republican Party in his own image. And we are now seeing that play out even in terms of staffing decisions that are being made now. Who is being frozen out, who is on the inside of various agencies, and, from RFK at HHS through to what's going on at the Department of Defense. I think people don't really know what to make of it, but I think there's a saying, you take Trump literally, seriously, but not literally. And, I think where people are sort of getting confused is they're taking him literally and not seriously.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
That's such a good line.
Yeah, it's a really good line. Obviously, after the inauguration of Trump 1.0, there were huge protests. There were lots of people on the street, people outside Trump hotels, even all around the world. We've not seen that this time. So, what's your thinking on that? So why hasn't there been this, or do you think it's because the margin of victory was bigger, or is it just we've seen it once before? So
yeah, I mean, I think there is definitely like a Dems in disarray thing going on right now, where people they're still kind of trying to figure out, like, they're doing their postmortem and trying to figure out why they lost, and half the Democratic Party is saying we didn't go progressive enough, and the other half is saying slow your roll, you're a little bit crazy pants. And so that's going to need to be sorted out among themselves. That's their problem. But I think beyond that, it's, there is, I think there's I think there's exhaustion, right? They're outraged about so many things at the same time. And, we have, Andrew, you and I have watched kind of the unicause, right? It's like the Palestinian, climate, abortion, trans people. Like, it's the same protesters doing all the things. I think they're stretched a little bit thin right now. But also, I feel like there's a non-zero amount of, this was Chicken Little. Like, you kept saying the sky was falling over and over and over again. And yet you have, Obama sitting there in the front row and Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton there. Like, if the sky is falling, then why are you at the inauguration? What is going on here? And so I think this has really kind of shown that on some level, was this all smoke and mirrors? Was this all just kind of campaign nonsense? I don't know. But yeah, I think as of right now, kind of the loyal opposition seems to be kind of broken, which is fine, because I got really sick of just all the masks and like the protest signs around DC for like right after the 2020 election.
Right. Yeah. What was it you called them? The uni protester, because same folks, right? It's kind of, they just I think they have like a cupboard full of different flags, and they're like, it's a Tuesday, it must be this one, right? So, almost like those Americans on road trips in Europe. If it's Tuesday, it must be Belgium. If it's like Tuesday, it must be whatever particular vegan Wednesday or whatever cause it is. Not that there's anything wrong with veganism, just in case any of our listeners are vegan. Just want to be clear on that. But no, the how people are going to respond to that, I just because you can't just keep going around doing this.
I've been hearing some Democrats talking about how, we don't need to stress out too much. He's already a lame duck president, or he's on the cusp of becoming a lame duck president. By the time he hits the 2-year mark, we're going to have midterms and sort of the usual cycle will kick in. I'd love your take on this, because I'm not convinced that that's the case, because I feel like whatever it is Trump represents, it doesn't necessarily need to have Trump as its figurehead, and that the MAGA movement can spread and others can sort of take the mantle as its choir of primary spokespeople. So I'm not convinced that he's a quote-unquote lame duck president, and he's got a 2-year window before things turn against him. But, what do I know? I'd love your take on that, Nicki.
I mean, some representative just introduced some bill that, is going to remove term limits altogether. So this is anybody's guess at my point in time. We might get Barron as like kind of the, next iteration of the Trump dynasty.
Right.
But yeah, I think there is going to be low-level jockeying over the next couple of years to sort of who is going to be the one that takes up the mantle. Will it be J.D. Vance that runs for president, or is it going to be Tom Cotton or somebody else? I think, there is still some fight left in the establishment Republicans who would prefer somebody more like Nikki Haley. How long is Marco Rubio going to be at the State Department? Is he a threat kind of from the more sort of establishment neocon wing? And so I think a lot of this is going to be, it's going to be kind of quiet and ugly over the next couple years. And yeah, as you alluded to, the midterms are a big question mark because it's not a great cycle for Republicans to defend. About a third of the Senate is up every 2 years. And so they kind of go in cohorts. This past cycle in 2024 was it was one where Dems had to defend a lot of vulnerable seats. In 2026, the Republicans had to defend a couple vulnerable seats. And if people are pissed off about Trump overreaching, I mean, that could really impact how those Senate races go. It's funny, I have some friends who work for the Senate and they're like, we really like being in power. Like, we'd really like to not lose these nice offices after 2 years. And so I think, there is kind of just a practical element of how bombastic are you going to be in a way that doesn't jeopardize what's taking place? With Mitch McConnell stepping out of the Senate, he was the one who had kind of been, for a couple cycles, he was not very involved, or he had sort of been pushed to the sidelines in picking candidates. And there were some not great Republican candidates that lost races that frankly should have been won. And this past cycle, I think there was more discipline, but we'll see how that goes, because if they end up with some more kind of like Todd Aiken type candidates going forward, or like that Christine O'Donnell, I'm not a witch woman, they could very much snatch defeat from the jaws of victory.
So you mentioned some of the folks around him, right? So you mentioned how the staying power of Marco Rubio. So what's your take on, we've already seen what's the Department of Government Efficiency? We've seen the
Doge,
that's it, Doge, Doggy or whatever it is. We actually, that sounds worse than I meant it to sound. But anyway, we've seen some movement there. So have these people got staying power? Do you think we're just going to see a cycling in and out of different faces? They're kind of like this, you keep them guessing, you're in 1 minute, you're out the next.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that is more likely, if past is prologue, I think it's likely that there is a little bit of an Icarus thing going on. So people who are hot and in the circle now are going to burn out. So I would not put my money on anybody staying in or staying close for a significant period of time, be that, the head of Doge or anyone else. It's also, it has been known for a long time, Trump doesn't like people taking credit for stuff.
Yeah.
And so to the extent, right, this is something that his chief of staff, Susie Wiles, has made very clear. There is not room for personalities or ego. And so to the extent where people claim credit or are being given credit for stuff, that works against them a lot. And so I think the hubris is going to end up catching up with a lot of people.
Okay. Interesting. I want to ask an American then, Greenland. Are you buying a second home there?
I like it, but only on the condition that we put casinos there and we have man versus polar bear races. And I will.
Right.
I think it's a money-making opportunity.
I mean, I think there may be a couple of issues with that, but we'll get somebody else on to talk about the polar bear racing issues, right? It's just political correctness gone mad, I'm sure, but there could be some issues. I guess again, this is one of the things where it more, the wider issue there is this whole issue around like Western defense, right? And this is one of the things where, you find yourself with Donald Trump as a conservative, as many of us do, I think, like kind of like being frustrated, but at the same time also occasionally going, yeah, actually quite right. Because, we got this whole issue where the West hasn't been investing in its defense. We know that here in Canada, especially, I think one of the very few countries I come from, obviously the UK, which is one of the very few countries to be maintaining it 2%, but suddenly he announced that it's got to be 5%, right? And we've been having this argument in the UK about going to 2.5% by 2030 or 2031, and all of a sudden Trump comes in and goes, oh, actually we want everyone to be at 5%.
Yeah, I can't believe. Where is Rachel Reeves going to come up with that money?
Well, I mean, she hasn't got any, largely because of her own decisions. But anyway, that's for another day. But actually, there's a real issue here, right? The West is not investing in its defence. We've all ridden on the back of basically American investment in defence for the last 60, 70 years. Not to say that lots of European and other countries haven't contributed in major campaigns and sacrificed lives in so doing, right? But he's onto something here, right? But the question is, like, does the Greenland stuff, does the whole, which I think he had that call with the Danish Prime Minister, which was described as horrendous. Actually, is it stupidity or is it brilliant? Because all of a sudden, what have we seen then? Canada here investing in border security and talking about defence. The Danes suddenly announcing billions of euros of investment in Greenland. All across Europe now, people are scrambling to say, well, actually, what are we going to do on defence? So, is it working?
I mean, I like it. I find it entertaining, but also I think big picture strategically, we have seen Russia make a significant play for the Arctic. There are tons of minerals in Greenland, and so it's not totally as crazy as it might seem off the top of, everybody's head.
Yeah, and it seems like years and years and years, everyone trying to talk in very polite ways and trying to do this the old way through typical institutions at the regular pace that you come to expect just doesn't work. Like Russia doesn't care about institutions. And Trump, I said previously on the show, Trump is not my type of conservative at all. But I mean, for fuck's sakes, he's getting people to react in a way they never reacted before. So if this is the style it takes to start getting movement on some of these big important issues, and global security is a big important issue, it's huge, especially for us in Canada, then fine. This style seems to be working, I think.
Yeah, and actually, you think like the people who, most play up to internationalism and global partnerships, the Democrats, they had the White House for all these years, and in that period, Western security retreated, right? We became weaker as a people. They were unsuccessful in convincing NATO allies to spend what they are committed to spending. But all of a sudden, this guy comes in bombastically, and everyone's now talking about and scrambling around saying, what can we buy? We should buy drones. And the problem with buying drones was didn't we buy Chinese drones here in Canada recently to... It kind of defeats the object of this whole trying to improve our border security and general defence by, buying from really one of the greatest strategic threats to our way of life. However, I digress somewhat, but yeah, I think it's just the keep them guessing again, right? It does bear results. We got to talk the trade policy though, right? So, we saw the tariff threat against Colombia, which was kind of a bit icky for a whole set of reasons, because whatever we think about migration, it was involving human beings, right, and how they are transported and all the rest of it. But more generally, we got the threat of 25% on Canada. Do you think where do you think Americans are at on that?
Well, I mean, I have heard Canada described as the apartment above a really good party. So I don't think, I actually just saw today a map of every state, broken down by state, every state's largest trading partner. And for a lot of the country, it is Canada. And I think people don't recognize that. That being said, I think, right now Trump is benefiting from the fact that schools in America are terrible and nobody understands economics. And so people don't realize that, wow, a tariff is actually going to raise prices for me, right? They think it's only going to hit the other guy and not them. And I think there is going to be a lot of cold water poured if/when any of this stuff actually takes effect.
But
I
when
don't
the
think
presents under the Christmas tree are so much more expensive next year, I don't know. That starts to get tough.
So yeah, I think it's just people they see sort of this kind of middle finger being given to the world, we're not going to be pushed around anymore, without really realizing what the second part of it is going to be.
Yeah, and I suppose it speaks to the kind of this Trump coalition he's built as well, right? Because, most of us in the conservative movement thought we'd won the argument for free market, decades ago. And, you look through history, whether it's the Corn Laws and, the pre-war stuff, the right goes through the cycle of, flirting with tariffs and protectionism, and then we move. But we kind of thought in the 70s, 80s, whatever, we'd won these arguments around free trade. But actually, for a lot of the voter coalition that he's put together, particularly kind of blue-collar workers, they are the people who that was a threat to. Right? So, I don't know where this ends within the Republican movement then, because the more traditional Republicans who are in Congress, of which there are plenty, are very broad, very firmly on the side where we would be, which is generally, I would think all three of us on the free trade side. So, how does that resolve itself?
Yeah, I mean, it's, and we saw this kind of realignment taking place during the election when a lot of the unions refused to back Kamala Harris, right? Because Trump said, I'm with you, buy American, kind of the stuff, as you alluded to, that was, they were traditionally Democratic talking points. His nominee for labor secretary is someone who has been very, very pro-union, to the point where even, members of the Senate are at this point uncomfortable. Republican members of the Senate don't want to vote for her because they consider her too union allied. So it's again, he was really meant it when he was going to prioritize America first. And when that impacts the economy, when prices rise, we'll see kind of how lasting support is for stuff like this.
Look, we've taken lots of your time. I don't know whether, Joseph, if you anything else you want to
I had about 10 minutes additional questions, but we lost 10 minutes to your microphone not fucking working again.
I think we've got time, so go on, Joseph. I was just because I was worried about taking too much of Nicky's time, so...
No, I'm kidding. No, we've gone well
that's why
past
I'm
time.
back on I look like a student pilot, right? Because this doesn't work. So you should probably impose a tariff on this. You should impose a tariff on this, Nikki, because whatever it is, it's not working. So
I feel like I think it was a user issue.
I beg to differ, and I find that very offensive. You've met me. I've never done anything wrong, right? Come on. It's always somebody else's fault.
No, this has been extremely helpful. Thank you so much for helping us translate what's going on south of our border, and we are so appreciative of your time, Nikki.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, welcome back. We are going to make sense of what Nikki shared with us. How are you coming along with the Fat Tug? Are you losing sight, losing sense of hearing or taste, or?
I am, but yeah, it's what I want from it. No, it's a completely delicious. But you can see from the color, it's resinous, it's piney. I always think it's like when you have a Fat Tug, it's literally like if you took a Christmas tree and minced it all up in a blender and drank it. This is how it would taste, which might sound horrible to some people, but actually it's not.
It's
delicious. Deliciously clear and crisp, resinous, piney.
And the other thing,
Victoria, right, which is where I'm going this week, so maybe I'll pop to the brewery. So.
Oh, nice. The other thing, I think,
snowshoeing in Victoria, so my snowshoeing club.
Right. Go catch some black bears.
What do you make of it?
What I've always liked about Fat Tug is the respect for the malt bill. So many new IPAs just go all in on the hops and have almost no grain or malt profile to it. And this to me is such a classic flavor where it's obviously very overwhelming on the hop and the hop bitterness, but you still get a little bit of caramel malt. So you get a bit of sweetness, a little bit of caramel flavor, and it still ultimately doubles down on being a beer that is built with a grain bill, and beer without malts can't exist. And so I love that we have respect for the malt bill in this.
And you can in it taste its lineage to the IPAs, right? The original, India Pale Ale, right? You get that in it. Whereas problem with, I think they're delicious. A lot of the, particularly the Nipas, right? It's hard to even trace
Nipa, for those of you who are not as into beer as Andrew and I, is an acronym for New England IPA, which are known to be very often sweet, but almost no bitterness, very juicy, very tropical, very citrusy, which they are absolutely delicious. But because they don't lean into the old school IPA notes, they don't give you quite that dry, bitter finish to the beer that I find quite delicious in a beer. I like having that crispy bite at the end of a beer.
It is an absolutely delicious beer, but one we probably... it does come with a warning saying strong beer on the side, so including in French, so that's good. But it is a delicious beer. So.
Let's talk about Nikki. So she's fantastic. I feel like we could have gone on, and we'll have to have her back on the show as things progress in the U.S. because it's nice too to have someone who's in D.C. to help us make sense of these things.
I liked her Dems in Despair line.
Yes.
One of her other lines I thought was really insightful as well. But the Dems in Despair was
that to me has you asked her the question on this, but it's been the single biggest. I've been surprised / shocked, or maybe I shouldn't be, just at how, everyone's kind of rolling over. There was 2016-17, you had just protests in the streets. Everyone was just so worked up. Can't believe this guy got elected. And maybe it's just because 8 years removed from that, we are at a point where people are like, that's life now. He won decisively. And we just know that there's a good chunk of America that really finds his message resonant. And so
America, the world, though, as I said to Nikki, right? It's really weird because when he said lots of the things he said back in his first term, people are, oh my God, that's outrageous. How can anyone think that? Now, lots of the things he said, even like some of his immigration stuff, is now mainstream opinion, right? And you now have, left-wing governments in Europe are actually now, taking some of these positions on. You had, the wall has broken, as it were, on a whole range of these issues, even on the DEI stuff and stuff like that, right? These are now held by not just traditional conservatives; they're held actually across the political. And actually, interesting on that poll I mentioned, by quite a lot of young people as well, which is what you see up here in Canada, right? With where the support is strongest for the Conservatives. So we all laughed about some of the stuff. Well, I didn't laugh necessarily, but lots of people laughed and mocked. But actually, the things in his first term are now just standard view for a lot of the public.
You see, the DEI stuff just continues to just collapse everywhere. I feel like I cannot open up any one of my news apps over the last week and a half without seeing yet another corporate walking away, laying off staff that had been this thing. And one reaction to that is, or one way to interpret that is, it is corporate organizations reacting as quickly as they can to the new political realities that they're in. But I'm not so sure that you move that quickly as a result of external factors and who's become president that day. I wonder I wonder how long some of these organizations wanted to dispense with DEI because some of the challenge it was creating, and they finally feel that they can do so, and it's not going to cause them. They got cover. It's not going to cause them a political nightmare.
Yeah, I think they've been feeling internal pressure on this stuff. Right? It's like even like liberal-minded friends of mine who would consider themselves like very liberal on a whole range of issues have gone, look, I'm kind of sympathetic to this community, but there are limits on what you can expect the rest of society to do, and what the rest of society has to compromise on, right? To accommodate you. Yes, you should be accommodated, but you should understand there are limits to your accommodation, and appreciate that some people have a different perspective, right? As opposed to just shouting at them. So even very liberal friends on the whole range, we won't get into which issues because we don't want to get too. But
Yeah, no, and a lot of that too, I think, just speaks to where the type of stresses people are experiencing now and where their political focus is. And we're just, with a level of clarity I feel we have not had since the 80s, the degree to which people are obsessed right now with economic well-being and anything that seems to be a distraction from the fundamentals of just unlocking some type of economic growth for individuals, I think is just seen as completely unnecessary.
But also stop lecturing me, right? Stop lecturing me and stop telling me I should be guilty of things that I had no part in, and telling me I've got all these, whatever it is. Just I think people have just grown tired of that, and they've grown tired of seeing it in the media. They've grown tired of seeing it in politics, and they've grown tired of seeing it in their workplace, right? Because there's literally, you cannot hide from it, right?
And it probably explains too, the several of the big news outlets have over the last week profiled a lot of these big podcasters who they believe had an impact on the election results in the U.S. I did a piece of my own Substack on this, which is the realization that we all have to have that if you want to speak to these audiences that now carry influence, you're going to have to engage with the people that they have a trusted relationship with. And the people they have a trusted relationship with are the podcasters and influencers who have demonstrated a level of empathy for them that other groups haven't. And I think this is, I've got this hypothesis that what's going to separate the effective communicators, no matter what issue you're communicating on or what policy position you're fighting for, what's going to separate you as a winner from a loser is going to be the degree to which you can demonstrate through your words and actions actual empathy for the audiences that you're trying to engage with. And I think, to your point, there's been years and years and years of people feeling like they've been lectured at, and now the response to that is to consume media where they're not lectured at. To people who are like, yeah, I get you, and I'm going to bring on people onto my show that are going to talk about the issues that you care about, and we're going to do so in a non-judgy way.
Also even hard to talk about it, right? Because, you immediately find yourself getting into the, oh my God, I'll now be labelled as, if I question any of it, it's like, oh, what you're saying, you don't understand because what would you know? You're a white privileged man or whatever.
It comes down to your earlier point on being lectured at. I'm actually rereading this book I read last year. It's awesome. It's great. It's called...
Joseph read 49 books last year whilst he was snowshoeing, probably. Right, I don't know. I mean, how did you read 49 books? I read one, right, and that was a struggle. A couple of times on a beach in Gran Canaria, I read a book, but anyway, you read 49. Sorry, I cut you off. So I was just
cut me off. But the point is,
your brilliance to us. Carry on.
No, what I was going to say is this book is all about, actually, it explores a concept of deep canvassing, and it explores some of the big contentious debates in the U.S. and how advocacy groups have been either effective or ineffective at changing public opinion. And the single most effective canvassing method, so it's not the thing you're taught about when you go to canvassing school, when you're in political canvassing. For me, I was taught you need to knock on as many doors as possible. As soon as you've identified the vote, you move on to the next person. And if you've identified that the door you knocked on is is a resistant vote that you can't easily win them over, move on, because you have only so many hours in a day. This, though, talks about how those who fought for same-sex equality in California were able to bring people on board by taking the time to talk with them, where the conversations were at least 20 minutes in length. And it's not the length of the conversation that mattered, but what mattered is that these advocates would take the time to listen to the other person and understand what hesitations these people had for supporting same-sex marriage. And lo and behold, it turns out that when you take the time to listen to that person's perspective, then through empathy, you demonstrate that you're not judging them for it, that you don't hate them for it, and then you go and you talk about your own story. Well, this is how I'm affected by it. You then create a dynamic where two people on opposing ends of a very deeply divisive issue, social issue, are then able to talk to each other as human beings and get to a point where opinions move. And I think this is what's been lost in the last 5 or 6 years is I don't care what side of the issue you're on, and where you feel, how you feel about many of these issues, but we've gotten to a place where no one was allowed to be heard, and if you held a dissenting point of view, or no matter what position you held, you're just judged and made to feel horrible for it.
You're either if you on the right, you're a bigot and a racist, and if you're on the left, it's like you hate the country, right? It's this, it's like, oh, you just hate America, you just hate Britain, whatever, or you're just a massive bigot, and no one's prepared to have a discussion. It's a bit to what in our first podcast said, that it's actually even worse than that now, isn't it? It's like, well, Joseph, I know he's in favour of this thing I'm not in favour of, so therefore he's also in favour of this other thing, so therefore I know I'm against it just because he's in favour of it, right? So
yeah.
I did used to enjoy when we had the same-sex marriage debate in the UK, when I had some quite bigoted constituents who would email me on that. So I'm never sure I changed their minds. I just used to write back to them saying, thank you very much for the email. I've got 2 pieces of advice for you. If proposed to by a member of the same sex, politely decline. Secondly, if invited to a same-sex marriage, maybe just send a nice card and a gift, rather than attending. I was like, these are my ways. I suggest you manage your uncomfortable feelings about this. Anyway,
so just be kind. Don't be a dick.
Which is where it's kind of. But the problem is now, like, the people who are advocating for stuff about kindness are actually sometimes the most unkind people, right? Right. So they're like, be kind to us, and if not, we're going to be really unkind to you. Not only are we going to be really unkind to you, we're going to put all your details online. We're going to dox you. We're going to encourage a online, a pile-on on you, and that's okay because you hold these views, and if it's okay. I mean, I had it happen to me when I was an MP, right? Literally, like, some people who would, like, I dare to go toe-to-toe with them back on online, who had been, advocating for what they think they were the kindest people, would then try and open up a string of the most awful, I had a Labour MP do it to me shortly before I left, of abuse at me, and that's fine, right? Because it's okay. We can, people who advocate for kindness can be the most unkind people. Anyway, we digress.
We digress, but I think the takeaway here for business leaders and professional communicators, if the types of shifts that you're seeing make you uncomfortable, then the way to respond to that is to double down on listening to the audiences that you need to engage with, and doing so with deep empathy. And I think if you do that, you're going to get a totally different perspective of public opinion, and then work with that. Decide what kind of implications that has for your business, how you want to handle some of these very sensitive issues. But it requires listening to actual people and doing so with empathy. And if you can't do that, then you're going to be coming at it from a place of judgment. And I think that causes even greater risk for you as you try to navigate these tough issues. All right,
anyway, we've gone on longer than we expected.
We've rambled on. That's the Fat Tug talking.
It is the Fat Tug, that's true, yeah. And basically, anything we said from the moment we opened this can onwards, we cannot be held accountable for. Send any complaints to Driftwood Brewery in Victoria. It's their fault for producing such a delicious beer.